Hoo-yah!
Hello there, fellow nerds. I was introduced to a new framework recently called Aurelia, and I know there's a new JavaScript web framework or a new JavaScript library coming out almost daily, but this one caught my attention because I just heard it talked about quite a bit. Typically, in the past, I've been a big fan of Sales.js, I've been a big fan of Strong Loop and Loopback, and quite a few others, but Aurelia seemed to just be like this more modern approach to it. Now, I'm not a big fan of jumping from framework to framework just for maintainability, but I love checking them out. And I've literally just started to watch this video a little bit that you see here on my screen, but I haven't done anything else with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through this with you guys, and we're going to work through what it really is. And I'm hoping after, 15 or 20 minutes, I'll have a pretty good understanding of its benefits or what I like and don't like about it. It's going to be hard to get a full judgment of that in that amount of time, but it's hopefully a good introduction. I typically judge it based on how easy it is to set up, how easy is it to do anything in there, and how many errors do I get during the setup process. If I get to a web framework and all of a sudden I just can't install it for whatever reason, and there's tons of reports on the GitHub forums with no one having an answer to it, I just typically walk away from that because I don't want to deal with those type of headaches. I want a framework that's clean, crisp, it comes in, it handles the way it needs to be, and it just works. So this is the Aurelia.io website. And ultimately, this video here starting to give a quick little overview of how to actually start an Aurelia project. It looks like there's a CLI, and you set up some stuff to actually create it. But before we go in and actually go through the get started part, which we will do, I just want to go through here and look at some of the features. Forward thinking, that's kind of funny. I mean, I would truly believe that every web framework, JavaScript framework would like to think that they're forward thinking. So I don't think that's anything that's that amazing. ECMAScript and web components, I mean, all that makes sense. Modern architecture. So what they're saying is rather than taking the monolithic framework approach, Aurelia is composed of smaller focused modules. Now, actually, I'm a big fan of that. I don't really like the monolithic approach where there's just a billion lines of code and you have no idea how it all works together. I like the idea of just bringing in components that you actually need. I'm hoping that is how this works. So let's read on. Use them together as a full-featured framework or pick and choose to build a custom solution. That I really do like a lot. Typically, I'm guessing we're going to be starting with the full-featured solution, but then ultimately I could most likely take a production environment, figure out the pieces I really need, and not have a lot of bloated extra code I'm not using. Two-way data binding. So that's kind of interesting. It enables powerful two-way binding to any object. Interesting. This I'm really excited about. By using adaptive techniques, we can select the most efficient way to observe each property in your model and automatically sync your UI with the best-in-class performance. Now that is actually quite intriguing. We may have to try testing that out depending on how complex that is to get up and running. They have an extensible HTML compiler that lets you create custom HTML elements and add custom attributes to existing elements and controlled template generation, all with support for dynamic loading, data binding, and high-performance batch rendering. All that sounds awesome, but I mean, I'm going to need to see that in practice to really understand what they're saying. There's just too many claims there that I can't make a good judge on that. Routing and UI composition. Now, one thing I do not like with things like React Native or those type of frameworks is sometimes navigation can be kind of tricky. So I always do pay attention to UI composition and or like dynamic route patterns. So let's see what they say about that. So we're going to leverage our advanced client-side router with its pluggable pipeline, dynamic route patterns, child routers, and asynchronous screen activations. Don't need a router, but need dynamic data-driven UI composition. We do that too. So that sounds promising as long as setting this up is not ridiculously complicated. MV with conventions. Who wants to waste time writing tons of configuration code for their MV architecture? So MV, and then they have an asterisk. So MV is model view. I'm not sure what the asterisk is getting at there. That must be something that I haven't seen. That I may have to look that up actually. that could just mean that the controller is missing, or maybe it's a new meaning for components, or I really don't know what that star means. Simply leverage conventions to make constructing your app effortless. You don't like the conventions? Plug in your own or drop them altogether. Okay. Broad language support. This is just a give me. Like, this has to happen. ES5, 2015, 2016, all that needs to be supported, including TypeScript. Testable by combining ES 2015 modules with a simple yet powerful dependency injection container. We make it easy for you to create highly cohesive yet minimally coupled code, making unit testing a snap. I mean, that's cool that they're thinking about it from that perspective. It's going to be interesting to see if unit testing is a part of the framework or if it's something that I need to bring in externally to make that work. So a couple more. So this is interesting. It's backed by a company, Blue Spire, with 10 years history dedicated to advancing rich web app. Which app development? Okay. Oh, this is interesting. There's not much here. So there's one guy. And this website doesn't look that great. I mean, I don't know how big of a strength that is. What I would look at more than anything is the GitHub. So we've got, just go to the framework here. What else do they have here going on? Alright. So there are close to 10,000 stars on here. Another thing I always look at is the issues. You want to see some issues, but you don't want to see an astronomical amount. So let's go in and see how far. Okay, they're getting a lot of comments, so that it is actively being maintained. Quite a few bugs that are actually getting some attention, which is great. 7 hours ago, this one was posted with no response. 5 days ago, with no response. So that stuff can kind of worry you a little bit. Although, you know, some of these might not be actual issues, so they might just be getting ignored. I also look at the most recent commit. So we've got one 9 days ago. Let's see what the span is between them. So we've got 9, 11 days. Then we go to July 30th, which would be another week or two. July 29th, July 11th, July 10th. Now, if you look at this, and it looks to be, okay, this guy is the same picture that we saw on Blue Spire here. So that is that guy. How much support is getting done outside of them? We've got this guy here and this guy, which is documentation. Some documentation. Let's see what kind of branches we have here. Let's just go here and look at the commits. Or the... So it was July 10th. And that was July 11th. So something must have happened. Interesting. So ultimately, I'd say I'm not overly impressed with this. I don't like the lack of commit. I mean, I don't like the commits only coming from one person, because if this person had something happen in their life, the project would probably fall apart. I typically would like to see several people backing this project. I do like that people are actually paying attention to it. Some people are even forking it, which is another interesting thing. I'd love to see at some point what these forks actually are. So this is typically, just to give you an idea, this is what I go through when I'm deciding on a new framework. So let's walk down here, and we have all this stuff set up. So here's the unit test. So they want read the documentation for the framework here. So let's go to this place then. And let's just go to getting started. Now this actually looks pretty nice. And we're just going to go to quick start with setup. Alright. I mean, I guess I was hoping to actually like do the installation and start from the ground up. I don't like just starting a configuring your environment. npm install, npm start. I know all that stuff. Looks like that had some webpack references. Okay. I am a web developer. Huh. I do not like this. Alright, here we go. Okay. No, on Windows, when installing Git for Windows, there is an option. Yeah, that's fine. So here we go. I believe I created a folder already here. So I'm going to drop that in my Dropbox folder. And let me just check to make sure I'm on a decent version of Node 591. A little old, but that should be fine. Because they said 4+ somewhere. Make sure I spelled that correctly. Let's see if I have all the prereqs, which I should. And if not, I'll figure out what that is. This is also a good test because I'm on a Windows computer, and sometimes things treat Windows as a second-rate citizen. So this will be an interesting test. Now, while that's going, let's continue down through here. While creating a project doesn't require npm3, front-end development in general requires a flat package structure, which is not available with npm versions prior to 3. Now that you've got your machine set up, we can create our contact manager app. To do this, just run au new. Cool, okay. Very similar to sales. For this tutorial, we are going to be working against fake in-memory backend. We've also pre-created the CSS and some utility functions, so we don't have to waste time on them here. Before we begin, you'll need to download the required assets. So, once you copy all these files to the source folder, okay, so let's just download that. Alright, so we're just going to keep that minimized for now. So this is still installing. Looks like it's getting near the end. Hopefully it doesn't fail out. It's taking longer than I would typically like. And I have pretty good connection. Alright, so what we're going to be doing, we're going to be looking at the picture of the final product. We'll begin to see the application structure and the pieces we need to build it. To begin with, we're going to set up our app class by configuring it with a router. This all makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, very similar to how sales would set that up. To add routing to your app, all you need to do is add a configure router. Okay. The framework will call this method, passing it a router configuration and a router. You can use the configuration object to get the router set up with the route you want. Use the map method to map route patterns to the modules that should handle the pattern. Minimally, each route needs at least a route pattern and a module ID. So that is done. So let's just get through, and we'll go back up here, and we are going to do au new. Hopefully this works. Alright, so let's just name this to, did they actually tell us? We should probably follow the direction. Contact manager. Alright, and select either default ESNext or default TypeScript. I actually prefer ESNext, so we're just going to do 1. Would you like to create this project? Sorry. Oh, that's pretty neat actually. Just yes. I'll just say yes. Would you like to install the project dependencies? I would believe I do. So hopefully that takes a few seconds here. Then just change the directory into the project folder. Into the project folder and run au run -- watch. This will run the app and watch the project sources for change. Open a web browser and navigate to the URL indicated in the CLI's output. If you've got everything set up correctly, you should see the message "Hello World" in the browser. Awesome. Okay, and I actually want to play around with that before I start doing any of that stuff. I would love to determine how all this stuff is going to work. So let's open up Visual Studio Code. And we're going to open a folder. And I am going to open up Aurelia Contact Manager. Select folder. Perfect. Big fan of Visual Studio Code, by the way. One day I may do a video on that. Alright, we're still installing project dependencies. That's probably going to take a while. So while we wait for that, I just want to look at binding. Binding basics. And actually, you know what? I should probably open up a new tab of this. Here, just hit back. Just to make sure I don't lose that page. Okay. Aurelia supports binding HTML and SVG attributes to JavaScript expressions. Attribute binding declarations have 3 parts. Attribute.command is equal to expression. Okay. Attribute is an HTML or SVG attribute name. Makes sense. Command, one way, two way, one time. That's pretty cool. Bind. So that's actually pretty neat too. So I wonder if this just ends up being the default most of the time. Expression is a JavaScript expression. Typically you'll use the bind command. Yep, sure enough, that's just the default. I do, so you also can use one time in performance critical situation if you don't expect data to change. So, Angular? It's like, is that what we're getting at here? But with a little bit more specificity around how they're bound, which is kind of interesting. Okay. So now, what's interesting to me is they spend a lot on the front end side of this. And I was actually expecting there to be more on the server side. Alright, maybe I'm just off a little bit. Alright, so we would do click that trigger equals cancel. That's cool. Yep. All of this is very similar. Simple call binding, like this all makes sense. String interpolation. Yep, perfect. So element content. Okay. Not blown away by that. Like, I don't know why I wouldn't use a web framework such as Sails or Loopback and just have Angular on the front end. I'm trying to be open-minded, but I'm not seeing the advantages yet. Internally dog-footed by, so that to me is not a bonus, so I wouldn't worry about that. Partnerships with both large and boutique consulting organizations, don't worry about that. We're still installing project dependencies. So that means there are a lot. So we were going to do some fun testing on that. That is incredible. Alright, what do we have here? I was curious though. I mean, I'm definitely always typically use Webpack, and I'm not too terribly familiar with JSPM. to even know what that is. So I might have to do some looking into what that is. Routing. I already looked at that. Dependency injection. So I mean, yeah, interesting. Let's say we have a customer edit screen that needs to load a customer entity for ID from a web service. We wouldn't want to place all the details of our Ajax implementation inside our customer edit screen. Instead, we want to factor that into a customer service class that our customer edit screen. Yeah, of course. So this is all front end. Let's just see what this is. Yep, fetch. It's just a basic HTTP client based on XML HTTP request that supports HTTP verbs, JSON-P, and request cancellation. Alright. Completely had a wrong understanding about this. This is very, very light in on the server side. Like, it's super light in. I mean, it almost seems like non-existent. So ultimately, I think what they're doing is pretty cool. Do I think this is going to have a long-term lifetime? I do not. I do not think this is going to have a long-term lifetime. React and Angular are just going to be hard beasts to drop, and I don't really see an advantage to this over using something like Angular, which has. Let's just do a comparison here. Make sure I find the right one. You know what? AngularJS. Let's just see if I can find it. Alright. I do think there's some weird stuff. So look at 240,000 followers. Here we go. Here's my GitHub link I wanted. 56,000 stars. 571 issues. Let's just check the commits. It's just going to be way more varied. There's quite a few different people that I see actually doing stuff on the project, which is awesome. I think ultimately, if I were to try to experience and build something, it would not be in Aurelia. But with that said, let's actually play with it. You know, because you got to give it the benefit of the doubt. So we're going to do AU run AU. Oh, actually, I got CD into contact manager. CD into. This might be the right place. We will find out. And supposedly it will give me a URL that I can then test. Interesting. So local is 9,000. There's hello world. No. Okay, now that we've got this set up, I just want to see if I can figure out. Perfect. I was hoping this would be the case. Ultimately, Adam is Gosu. With the watch, this should actually update in real time. Yes. Now, Gosu actually means Korean. Gosu does not mean Korean. Gosu is Korean for like excellent, super good, amazing. Okay, so let's see what our HTML is. And yeah, it's just super easy. And let's see, we want an H2 $, math number H2. And if I were to go into app.js and I were just to do start equal to 45, Yeah. So I mean, that's pretty cool. But is it any better than what we had with Angular? I don't think so. They do seem to have a plugin for testing, so that might be worth checking out. Is it awesome? Absolutely. The people that made this should be very proud of themselves. But is it something that I would trust to go into a production environment? I wouldn't yet. I don't think it has enough following. So that's sort of my final grasp on this. I think they're doing some awesome stuff, and I feel like he's making quite a bit of traction. I think they're stretching the limits by saying they're backed by a commercial entity a little bit. This seems like a one-man company, and it seems like this one guy is a genius because he's writing a ton of stuff just purely on that project. So ultimately, I would say currently Aurelia is not worth trying unless you're just doing something fun for yourself or you are interested in all the new frameworks. I would not currently put Aurelia into a production environment simply due to the lack of activity behind it. And it's doing something that another framework does probably just as well. I haven't put them together to compare, and if you're an Aurelia fan, I apologize. But Angular JS does just as good a job, in my opinion, from what I've seen, as Aurelia is doing, and it's well supported. It's something that there's tons of documentation on. I would say if you're looking for something like Aurelia, which ultimately I'm still surprised that it has a server component and it's such a light server component. When I was talking to an individual, he made it sound like this was an all-in-one tool that could do everything and could do no wrong. That is not the case. I would not use Aurelia at all for a server. I would use something along the lines of Loopback or Sales.js if you're looking for a JavaScript framework, which I can go into detail on those again at another point. But ultimately, I would say give this one a pass. And until next time, coders, peace out.